it is not a level playing field. I thought it was. No one ever told me it wasn't. And now I know it isn't. I'm like, okay, now I can work around that. And when you understand ADHD and you can look at, okay, what are the things? Because there are things with every ADHD that neurotypical people will look at and go, oh my God, how do you do that?
This is the Born to be Brilliant podcast, helping you harness the habits and unlock the tools to bring you more meaning, vibrance, and the personal power to help you shine like the diamond you are. I have got Kim Raine in the podcast studio with me today. And Kim is an ADHD entrepreneur, educator, speaker, and author of Square Pegs, which is a book I am very fond of. Kim, a massive welcome to the Born to be Brilliant podcast.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I cannot wait to have this conversation with you as a fellow entrepreneur woman with ADHD, and I know lots of our listeners will be eagerly tuning in and wanting to hear from you today. Tell us a little bit about you, Kim, and just what brought you into this field.
So my background has been in coaching in various forms for about the past 20 years now, which just seems to get more and more every time I say it. So, and along with that, having my own businesses, building businesses, running businesses, some successful, some not so successful. And we'll get into the highs and lows of entrepreneurism and ADHD as we get into it, I'm sure. But the way that I got kind of like the ADHD part of that came round was probably about 8 years ago now. A client of mine, I was coaching high flying women, really, either entrepreneurs or actually more in corporate that were higher up. So the lady that I'm going to say about was the global head of talent for a huge media company that everybody would know. And she was, like many of these women, the epitome to me of success, like huge team, really responsible job, very successful, high earning, all of the things. But I was generally coaching women who had got to that stage, but had, sacrificed their health and well-being for it. Now they were burnt out. They were struggling with overwhelm. They were struggling with their confidence and everything that went along with that, hormones, sleep, etc. So I always say, I've been coaching 20 years. I have officially been coaching ADHD probably about 4 or 5 years now, unofficially 8 years. But now I know, I can see unknowingly, I've been coaching it, for the whole time. I can really see it now, where the kind of elephant in the rooms were when there was just this thing that just wasn't quite, you just kept missing the ball. So with this particular client, she said to me one day, she said, Kim, I think I might have ADHD. And my response was kind of stereotypical. I thought, well, what? You can't have ADHD. Look how successful you are. Look at everything you've got. And of course, that just opened a door for me that took me on a journey that led eventually, but not straight away, but I was kind of inquisitive a little bit about myself at that point, but not really, more in a jokey kind of way. These things kind of cipher into your life. But it led to, my daughter's diagnosis, my diagnosis, and to several of the women that I was coaching who were, not all of them, but quite a few of them were struggling. And I was like, oh, wow, hold on a minute. And then I was like, could this be? But you have to, it took me a while to get to that before I spoke to clients about it, because I did my own discovery, and it was probably another year or so until I was kind of like thinking, hold on a minute, this is actually far bigger than what I'd even thought at all at the beginning. I just thought, it was quite mind blowing once I could see it. And, I would look around at clients who, another client, she said to me, now she was 63, and I said to her one day, and I'd actually coached her throughout these 20 years in various ways, in lots of different guises. And so I knew her really quite well. And we would come around and we would do really well. And then we would come back to the same sorts of problems. And one day I said, do you think that you could have ADHD? And at the time she was she was working with her psychiatrist, who she'd been working with for 5 years. She was diagnosed with general anxiety disorder. She was medicated for that. She'd been on antidepressants for as long as I'd known her, for a long, long time. And she wasn't happy, and she was still very anxious, and she was still very overwhelmed, and she still was kind of like, life would just slip through her fingers. And we would have these highs, but then suddenly it would all sort of fall apart. And I sort of said one day, and the next stage was the psychiatrist was like, look, I think we should look at a bipolar diagnosis. And I said to her, do you think you could possibly have ADHD? And she said, well, no, because my psychiatrist would have picked that up. And I said to her, would you do me one thing? Would you speak to your psychiatrist? Just so happened that later that week she was, and she got in touch and she went, he's sending me for an ADHD diagnosis. And 6 weeks later, she got the diagnosis that was, the kind of answer to all of these. It tends to be the answer to all of the bits and pieces. And I always say, ADHD actually is everything else, a lot of things, and not for everybody, but symptoms. If I look at really what the symptoms of ADHD are, the emotional sides of it is, comorbidity. Very often we find depression, we find anxiety, eating disorders, binge eating, overeating, or just disordered eating, the burnouts, etc. And actually maybe ADHD is the cause and all of the other things are actually the symptoms and not the causes. So it kind of like put a few light bulbs. So it was like, talking to you now and looking back on it, I was like, wow, it was such an interesting, amazing time for me, because I was like, oh my goodness, this is life changing. For my client in her, she was 63. There was a lot to unpick then. It was a lot to actually find that out at that age. And, one particular day she said, Kim, I almost wish I didn't know, because it was so much to take on. She's not in that space now. And, we're years later and she's very, she now understands. But at the time it was a lot. It's a lot. It can be quite a lot.
Were the other diagnoses still valid, or were they misdiagnoses? So prior to that one,
it's like they were still valid in that, yes, she still had the anxiety, she was still struggling with depression, and people do still have these things, and so they're not they're still valid. But I think that sometimes they are misdiagnoses. Like, again, over the years, I cannot tell you the amount of women that I've worked with who have come to me who have been on antidepressants for years, who are still struggling with depression, or, actually it's not that it's that they feel depressed, but they're not maybe depressed as in, depression is like unable to get up out of bed, unable to go forward and stuff. And actually it's just this low level, like I sort of say, it's like depression of the body, which actually with ADHD, we have these highs, we have this doing all the stuff, go, 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 go. And what will nearly always follow it is a low. And that low will be, maybe mentally you'll feel low because you are depressed, your body is depressed, your energy is low, you've run out of gas.
You burnt through all the dopamine.
And so, yes, you are depressed, but actually, is it that you've got depression? I don't know if I'm explaining that very well.
No, you are.
Anybody that's listening that's like, no, I have depression, because, when people talk about diagnosis to me nowadays, I just think a diagnosis is however you want to look at it. Some people are like, I don't want the label, I don't want the badge. But I think the symptoms and the feelings are still very much valid. Very much valid. But I think that what we are seeing now, where everyone's like, I do this keynote of like, how come everyone's suddenly got ADHD? Because that's what I hear all the time. Like, how come? Well, ultimately, if we look at the cases of misdiagnosis and all those years, actually, we're seeing a lot of that. We also have a better understanding of neuroscience and how the brain is, and all of those things that lead into these extra diagnoses. But so it's.
Well, that was actually going to be one of the things I was going to ask you, because but it's great that you've said it, because I have a diagnosis and I know lots of women who don't yet, or they do, or whatever. But even in my professional career, not anything to do with that, I've seen the advances in research and in evidence and in understanding of what it is. And I will, hands up say there was a point in the past when I was curious about what it even really was, and I'm talking like a long time ago. Obviously, it used to carry the old connotations of it's the hyperactive boys,
Yes.
the classic. Us girls never, we never showed any signs of that. But that was the kind of stereotype. And then in my sleep expertise area, I would find, and even working with medical people, they would often talk about like we don't know a lot about ADHD and other things. Like I know ADD is not really not really a thing anymore, and it's changed, and so much has changed, basically is what I'm saying. So much has evolved. And there wasn't, I don't think, as much of a clear understanding about what it even is or where it comes from or which comes first, the chicken or the egg situation. Yeah. So in that sense, like it's no wonder we are seeing this massive rise in diagnoses, and especially in women where it was not seen or spotted or understood. And so of course, like that's going to cause what feels like a surge. And if, like us, you move around the women in business space, you're gonna think, wow, everyone does everyone have this? So I guess that's the thing, is like, how do we know? Like, no. I even challenged the psychiatrist who diagnosed me, because even though I knew, I was like, well, obviously I know you're right, because I could have told you, and I knew it was obvious once I understood it. But how do these assessments prove that? And how do we know for sure without scanning the brain? And even if you scan the brain, like it shows, does it? Like I don't honestly know the answer to this, but I'm like, how do we know when it is ADHD and when it's personality? Because I know there'll be people out there that go, that's just personality. Like there will be the skeptics.
And I think that is a huge part of the issue, is that ADHD symptoms. I mean, I can tell you now that anybody listening to this, if you're neurotypical and have, never thought you've had ADHD, maybe you're listening because of a friend or a colleague or something, I promise you, by the end of this, you will think, oh, maybe I've got ADHD.
Me too.
ADHD is actually personality traits, but amplified. So
right. Okay.
Actually, and when people say, oh, well, isn't everyone a little bit ADHD? No, everybody isn't a little bit ADHD, although it is sort of like on a spectrum. But actually, if you have ADHD, those personality traits, we're all a bit unmotivated sometimes. We all get emotionally dysregulated at times. We all,
get
find
sensitive
it hard
to rejection or
all of those things. They're all human nature and they're all personality traits. But with ADHD, there's a couple of things for diagnostic criteria, is that they were around as a child.
Mm-hmm.
So they have been present in your life since childhood.
Mm-hmm.
They show up in several areas of your life. So not just when you're at work or not just when you're at home, for example. And they're causing significant impact in your life. They're causing challenges and problems for you in your life. And so actually, and what happens now is for women, as they're coming into, we'll talk maybe about this separately, but hormones have a huge impact. We'll come back around to that, but
that's on my list.
Okay, I'll shush about that for the minute then. I won't get straight to the punchline. But, that actually has a massive impact. So there are going to be times when you look back through your life and you think, I wasn't very ADHD then. It was okay then, and now it's not okay. And so actually, I think that we do diagnose ADHD through quite anecdotal sort of stuff, symptoms, and they will look at your childhood and they might speak to a family member. It does on MRI. We know that it shows up things like the prefrontal cortex is 3 to 5% smaller, or areas of it. There's certain differences within the brain, but ultimately they don't scan for ADHD. It's not something they scan for, which, I mean, the way things are at the moment is just as well, because that would make their waiting list even longer. But I think that, anecdotally, the evidence is there. And I think that there was a program last year or the year before, a Panorama, that was, based on the journalists going out and kind of disproving, that trying to feed the ADHD, it's so easy to get a diagnosis, they're giving them out like Smarties, etc., etc. And so he went to some providers, and he also went via the NHS, and the private providers gave him a diagnosis and the NHS doctor didn't. And I'm sure his name was Dr. Mike Smith. And he later on, I think that came out, say, Wednesday, and on Friday he did an article in The Guardian that said, I feel like I was slightly misrepresented there, because obviously, you know, like I purchased it, I think this guy probably did pay up a little bit to a diagnosis, towards getting a diagnosis for the private thing. But what he said is, ultimately what we're seeing now is that actually we haven't got a case of overdiagnosis. We've got a case of years of misdiagnosis and underdiagnosis. And actually what experts believe, and we know, is that, and I've been using this stat for a while, so it used to be like 75 to 80% of people with ADHD are still not yet diagnosed. Wow. Hopefully that's come down a little bit in the last few years, but it's still a hugely high amount. And what this doctor said, he said, is, you know, actually in my experience, most of the people who come to me for an ADHD diagnosis do have ADHD.
Because they wouldn't be coming forward if they weren't.
And I think of myself, and I think, and the people that I speak to very often, so now I train ADHD coaches, and very often when I speak to them, their journey and their skill set has usually come from trying to fix areas of themselves or find out answers for themselves. And that was my journey. You know, I used to know something wasn't quite right, and my head, my kind of like play in my head was always, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? What the hell's wrong with me? Like, because I knew, it's like, why can't I keep up with life? Why can't I do what I see other people doing? Why what the hell's wrong? So, you know, I think that actually most people that are seeking a diagnosis probably are valid in certainly trying to get a diagnosis, you know, because it is more challenging. It is just personality traits, but they are amplified, and they do really get in the way of life. You know, when people say ADHD is a superpower, well, I always say that's great if you're speaking to a 5-year-old, but, you know, I'm a 51-year-old menopausal woman, and when I'm, you know, can't find my keys, or, you know, I've bought myself holiday insurance 3 times, which is what I did the other day. You know, I don't feel like I've got a superpower at all. It's quite the opposite.
Yeah, I think
No.
But I do think there are sometimes some things that you can tap into that can be strengths. And so perhaps then, is it possible there are people that have ADHD? I almost don't like saying have, because it sounds like you have some kind of illness, but you know what I mean, that you know, are wired ADHD, who, whether they're diagnosed or not, if they're managing it well, it's easily going to then be seen as personality traits, because it's not debilitating, therefore they probably won't get the diagnosis actually, but they, do you see what I'm saying? Is that a possible, I suppose that is a possible thing.
So I think what you're saying is, you know, like for some people, they may not get a diagnosis, they may not want a diagnosis, they may not need a diagnosis, they may not think that, you know, that ADHD is them, you know, that they are ADHD, but actually, and I see people who have ADHD and it's not a problem in their lives, and whilst it's not a superpower, it's an inconvenience at times. And there are times, you know, and I would kind of put myself in that camp. You know, I've had numerous burnouts. I've made some, you know, like gone round in circles many times in my business. There's things that I've done in my life that I look back and think, oh my goodness, actually, if I'd have known about ADHD, would that be different? But for me, generally, it's not been too awful. It's not been a complete walk in the park. But I speak to, and some of the people I work with are like, yeah, I've got ADHD. It's a pain in the bum. It's inconvenient, but it's not blighted my life. I speak to other people and it's, you know, been horrific for them. And, you know, again, I would say for myself, there are times when my ADHD internally, because, you know, you said about, you mentioned actually like ADD and that, you know, and girls not being diagnosed. Well, a very generalization is ADD as opposed to ADHD. So what we have now is we just diagnose ADHD, but we have 3 types. We have predominantly hyperactive type, we have predominantly inattentive type, and then we have a combination of the 2. Which most people are a combination of the 2. Children tend to present more hyperactive, certainly young boys, but girls tend to present more inattentively, which means that we do still have the hyperactivity, but it's cognitive. So actually, where I can say, no, ADHD hasn't been a big issue for me. And most people will look at me and go, but you've not bothered. But inside my head, there's been like like monkeys playing the banjos and people jumping up and down. It's just been crazy. It's been a circus in there sometimes because it's been cognitively full on.
Yeah.
And, I think that there's certain things that, and like anything in life, if I speak to somebody who ADHD has been, because it's highly hereditary. We know it's as heritable as hair color and eye color. So it runs in families. And what I see quite often is that clients when they describe their childhood and when they describe their parents, actually you can think, right, well, this was probably undiagnosed, unmanaged ADHD.
Yeah.
And that parent was doing the best they could, but it wasn't a great experience for the child. The child comes out with huge amounts of trauma, or upset, or just having all sorts of things that can come up, challenges. We know that there's more bullying, there's more outcasts, there's a lot more struggles growing up with ADHD. We know that, the general, I think it's Dr. William Dodson says that, a child with ADHD will have something like 20,000 negative connotations by the time they're 12, as opposed to, no, I've just made, and I think a neurotypical, every child has those negative connotations, but they might be, it's like, what's wrong with you? Just sit down, just be quiet. Oh, you're such a pain. Oh, you're so noisy. Oh, you're too much. Or, oh, you're not enough. That's something that I hear. So all those things can build up, and that leads you to be, and if you are as an adult dealing with all of that inside you, and you've got that cognitive hyperactivity, and inside your head is a load of negativity and negative comments and negative comments and experiences that you grew up with that shape the person you are. We know, like, our formative years, we're like a sponge, and they do have a massive implication of the adults we turn into. Then that's a very different ADHD that you're dealing with compared to somebody who, maybe grew up in a more positive environment.
Yeah, that is so true. And I think also, depending on, like you mentioned about hormones and stages in life and trauma, like I understand that can, I guess, bring it to the surface. So if you're, I suppose, depending on who you are and what you do, it could lie dormant, as it were, and not necessarily show itself, or you see so many of those debilitating things. It's almost like not a problem till it's a problem. Like I wonder if, because I can look back and go, oh yeah, in childhood and and see it, but it didn't show itself until I was 40, and then I'm like, well, yeah, now obviously more pressure, more things going on, juggling other things, certain things that perhaps kept it at bay are now not happening in my life. And if you're setting the bar really high for yourself, and if you'll find the debilitation that you might not find if you weren't in that environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that, so there's a few things like that we can kind of take out of that, is like, for women, you hit 40, you're starting perimenopause. Okay, it may be, but for some women, it would be like 40 years old. Oh my goodness, everything really changed. Other women, it'd be really quite insignificant things that maybe are going on in your body that you're not very aware of or as aware of. But as you go through your 40s, average age of menopause in the UK is 51. But like, so by about 40, 45 particularly, your hormones are starting to change, and we know that if estrogen is low, then dopamine is low as well, and so we are starting to struggle with, and so that will happen through a woman's life. So puberty is like menopause in reverse. So during puberty, for a girl, for a female, all those hormones, and basically someday they're high, someday they're low. You'd never know where you are, certainly during that time when they're not settling down. Then you go through life, and if you have your menstrual cycle, if you have a menstrual cycle, you have that. So at certain times in the month, you will find that there is usually sort of like from, I don't know, the week before your period for most people, depending on, but roughly about 7 to 10 days beforehand, you might start to feel your symptoms get more prominent, more stronger.
Yeah.
And then you'll have these kind of like weeks where, oh my gosh, I'm like superwoman. I can do all this. I can make, oh my gosh, yes, let's do that. That's a great business idea. Count me in for that. New ideas coming at you. I can do it all. And then all of a sudden, the last 2 weeks of your cycle come and you're like, oh my gosh, give me a duvet and tell the world to go away. I don't want to do any of it. And you're counselling things left, right, and centre and that sort of thing. And then coming into our fourth, and then after childbirth, so another time when hormones just drop off of the cliff after we've had a baby. And so then, hormones are so supportive to ADHD. Estrogen is not known as, but it is a cognitive hormone. It helps us so much. And then obviously into menopause, we know about estrogen, brain fog, and progesterone as well. I mean, not to leave that out. They're both really important. So you have that going through your life. So I think that, like you say, there'll be times when you're like, oh, and I can look back on my ADHD and think, oh, sometimes, I quite liked it. It was quirky.
Yeah.
I was wild. I was fun. I was a bit like, oh my God, what am I going to do next? I didn't know. They didn't know. It was brilliant. I quite liked that side of me.
Yeah.
Take me to 40, 44, 45, 46, stick me in a pandemic, give me a, business to run and various other things that were going on in my life. And oh my goodness me, my ADHD was driving the bus and it was a problem. It was a real problem.
Becomes a proper problem.
Absolutely. And the other thing that you mentioned, which I see so much, is this need to achieve very often in women with ADHD. And this insatiable drive. And it's the blessing and the curse, but so in girls, in young girls, it can be, I know girls that have they've got straight A's, easy peasy as well, not even been a problem. Some of them, it has been a problem. They've worked so hard, but they've gone and they've got this and they've gone from one thing to another and they've got all these accolades and, results and degrees and all of the rest of it. Everything's amazing, but it's never enough. It is never enough. And that is that internal hyperactivity. That is that internal part of I need to keep moving forward. I need to keep moving, but also this need to prove. And in my experience of the 20 years of coaching, what I say is the thing that has always underlined coaching, no matter who or what I've been coaching in what kind of guise, it's always been about enough. It's always been about, am I enough? Am I doing enough? Have I got enough? It's always about that. And I think if you add in ADHD, so the hyperactivity, that means you get to the end of the day and it's like, oh my God, the end of the day is coming. I haven't done enough. That then keeps you up working late.
Yeah.
Add to that the RSD, the sensitivity that we have in our emotions to rejection. The fact that, very often, so for me, as with my ADHD, the amount of times I've dropped the ball, the amount of times I've let myself down, the amount of times I've let other people down, the amount of times I've, built something up and it was all going to be amazing. And then at the last minute, somehow I've just fluffed it up, add into that and that constant need to prove and move forward. And it's exhausting. It's exhausting. And I see that in so many women with ADHD.
I can relate. Yeah.
And successful ones. And the other side of that is that's what gets us to where we are.
It is because because you wouldn't, or someone else wouldn't even start. So we'll start when someone else wouldn't even start, but getting across the finish line can be very, very challenging.
And we don't sometimes know where to stop. And, we can often not finish things. We get distracted by other ideas. I mean, to actually I work with entrepreneurs as well. And, my thing with entrepreneurs and myself, and this from my own experience, is finishing what we start, keep it, I think I did a reel the other day that went out about, I almost have to let my entrepreneurs come on and just dump all their new ideas. Like, okay, come on, let's get all the new ideas out, because we're never short of ideas. But actually, so if you choose to act on all those ideas all the time, you're not chasing the one thing that's going to
Yeah.
You can be stuck in creation.
Yeah.
So you're always creating this, creating that. Well, we need to sell. We need to have a, like a product or a signature thing that we're selling it. And very often I see people always creating because, that's not quite good enough. Or, I tried to launch that and it didn't quite work. And so, I've got to start everything again. Well, no, we just have to refine but I'm bored of that now.
Yeah.
I'm used to that. I've done that.
This is new and exciting over here.
Yeah.
Like
ADHD brain will always prioritize the interesting over the important, no matter how important it is, who you're doing it for, because ultimately we need dopamine because dopamine is our motivation. And if something is interesting, it's going to give us that ping. And that's not even us just wanting to be, just like not being able to stick with it. That's our biology that says you need to be motivated, because without any motivation, you won't do other things. You won't eat, you won't sleep, you won't reproduce.
Yeah.
We need dopamine. We need it.
So
we're doing anything to get it.
Yeah. And at our own detriment quite often. Yeah. So would you say then, again, like, I hear you and I get it firsthand, but I do know there are people who don't, or are on the fence or confused or unsure. Some of those things, so the hormones, even in adolescence and all through life, and some of those different experiences and things you've described there, would you say that they can and are often true for anyone, but they're heightened with ADHD? Because, there are various videos and things and talks about cycles and just, and then this bit you want to just put your hoodie on, and then this bit you're like, let's go, I'm ready to film all my reels. And like that can be true for anybody, but when you have ADHD, it's more exaggerated and more heightened. Is that, am I understanding that right?
Absolutely. So again, and this is, you've hit the nail, it's not to take anything away from anybody, because every woman will go through puberty, or if those born female, all the time you're having a menstrual cycle, you are going to go through puberty. If you have a child, your hormones are going to fall off a cliff at the end of it. If you have a menstrual cycle, you are going to have, just by the nature of what the hormones do, estrogen is very much the let's go out, let's party, let's go into progesterone's like, oh, let's stay at home, and it's like anti-anxiety. So we're always going to be driven by those anyway. With ADHD, and if you're going to have your menopause, and it's going to be the same, and those symptoms are there for everyone, without a doubt. And it's not saying, but we know that there's more postnatal depression with ADHD. We know that PMDD, so like when you have PMS, but far more violent, you can be violently ill, you can have serious like suicidal thoughts, it can be extreme. It's extreme. This is not just
the blues.
This is not just the blues. This is not just a spot of PMT. Higher in women with ADHD. We're now realizing that eating disorders higher in women with ADHD, obesity higher in ADHD, and actually we know that there's lots of our endocrine systems, we are more sensitive. If we think about, we're more sensitive to burnouts. We know, I mean, there's still so much we don't know. There's so much we don't know, particularly around women, and particularly around women and hormones, because that's expensive to study. And without going into the whole thing, we know that most studies are done, and this was the thing, most studies on ADHD were done on prepubescent boys. That's the data that we had. Now we're getting every week new data coming out all the time. So we will learn more and more. But I've forgotten what I was saying now, because that's the other thing ADHD does.
Exactly, it does. You can be full flow and it just drops out of your head.
It's just gone. But I think that we are learning more and more. There's so much we don't know about females with ADHD and hormones, and it's not to say that it isn't the same for everybody, but we know that the numbers are higher and that we are more sensitive. Oh, that's what I was going to say. Sorry. So they did studies on boys, their early morning cortisol. So boys with ADHD, their morning cortisol was higher. So this is just me saying this, but if I think of how my clients run
Yeah.
and the burnout and the, particularly going back to clients that I've worked through the years, cortisol and that burnout and that stress and that overwhelming, irregulated cortisol. So waking up in the middle of the night or not being able to go to sleep at night and then waking up in the morning feeling like you haven't slept at all is so high. And if I look back, I'm like, oh, I can just see the ADHD clients and that are more driven by that way of life and have more problems with cortisol regulation.
I wonder if little ones that are early risers at wake, typically early no matter what. Like I've got a lot of experience in that area. And I wonder if there's a pattern there, actually. That's definitely an interesting one, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, we also know as well, what we do know now is that, studies show that, and these are smaller studies, but that ADHDers have about an hour and a half delay in their circadian rhythm. So actually also tend to be less wanting to go to sleep at night. So, a lot of ADHDs do struggle with going, they do sort of relate to being night owls. They
Struggle
might
to
come
wind down.
Yeah. And I would say, actually, I have early morning, I'm good.
Yeah.
And the other time when I'm good, when I can really do stuff, is at about coming in for about 8 at night, and I can go to 2 or 3 in the morning. I don't do that ever anymore.
No.
But I used to do that because I'd be
Same.
like, oh my God, look at me. And suddenly all the things that I've been trying to do, I could I was
flow.
awake on fire.
Yeah.
Also, those times of the day, I now realize that I'm not distracted. I've not got the emails. I've not got the texts. I've not got
one's going to interrupt you.
Yeah. And that's what we need. But
I say that a lot, actually, to my husband. I'm like, I know why I end up going, I'll just do it now because I can no one's going to bother me. And, but I am...
payout for that, you pay.
Yeah, exactly. So I have to be disciplined in that. No, I know that I need to go to bed. I need to get the sleep and I need to be on fire tomorrow. But if I were left to my own devices, it would be like, oh yeah, this is a good time to do this
and
work.
I think before I understood my ADHD, I'd be like, I'd just go and go and go. And I would always burn out at the critical moment. I would always be, and I see clients do this, getting ready for a launch of a product. And so you're going. So you're pulling all those late nights and and then it would come the launch and the moment where you really need to step up and be out there and be out in the world. And I would be on my knees on the floor broken and couldn't, just couldn't see it all through. Now I'm like, okay, Kim, this does not work. We can sprint and we can do that sometimes.
Yeah.
Actually, it's like when you understand it, now I do use it. It's like I don't do it till 2 o'clock in the morning.
No.
But I'm like, you know what? I know that this is when I'm just going to do it. Or I'll wake up some days and, don't do like, I just wake up. I might be in my pajamas. I'll come to my desk and I'll stay there till 2 o'clock. But that one morning I will get 3 weeks of work done that everybody's waiting for me for.
Yeah.
And I do it. But I know if I try and do that all the time, other things suffer.
Can't do it all the time. But that's it. And also we get that dopamine rush, don't we, from the deadline. So when something is like on the deadline, it's like, if I know someone who describes it as like, if I haven't got to put out all the fires and it's life or death and it's all emergency now, then it's not actually that exciting. So, so when it gets to that level of adrenaline and excitement around it, then you're motivated to go and you get it done. So
your dopamine's going and then all your hormones are kicking in and that's your fuel. You're fueling yourself then.
Oh, there's so many things that I want to ask you. Do you think, because it's more talked about, which is great, and more people are, questioning and learning, and like you say, there's so much more information available now. Children obviously get wind of that and they start to go, oh, well, what's this? And could I be like this? How do we... Well, especially if you're an ADHD parent and you're like, well, it's highly likely actually that this could go through to my children. But it's not necessarily debilitating at the child. It wasn't debilitating for me as a child. It only became like problematic in life when it became a problem. So I struggle with leaning into a label or a diagnosis. And I know it can be really easily done. I know there'll be adults that go, brilliant, I've got this diagnosis, that's it now. It's not my fault. That's just, can't help it. Can't help it. It's out of my hands. It's out of my control. And I don't like that. I feel like you can take that information and use that information as power to know how to take the best care of yourself, to set things up. Like, I know I need order, because in chaos, I can't function in chaos. So I actually need things to be really tidy. I know, it's because
we've got to do the tidying. We don't want to do the tidying.
No, I don't want to do it.
Our tidier.
I can have a Monica cupboard.
You can focus more when it is tidy, but we don't like doing the tidying. That's exhausting. But I just want to say that you just said something. What did you just say? Something that's like,
it was like there was kind of two things going on there. That's because of
there was about the children and labelling, which I will come to. I think that's really important,
and leaning into it and almost becoming it.
About the excuse and it
being,
what I'm going to say is, I think that there will always be people that will be like, okay, now I've got an excuse. Oh, brilliant. Okay, it's not my fault anymore. It's not my responsibility. But those people will always like that anyway. There'll always be those people who are, they're reactive in life. Everything's always somebody else's fault. It's never, and those are the people who struggle to get on in life, because it's quite disempowering way of thinking. Most people, I think, or certainly in the, in our space, in this entrepreneur space, is if we want to, most people are after that diagnosis because they want answers. And actually, ADHD, if you use it as an explanation, it changes everything. I mean, everything. And what I have seen and worked with, so many women who have had that negative background and they've got those negative thoughts in their heads. And one of the, the things that I work with the most is about their confidence. And actually what happens is, once you have that diagnosis or you have that explanation, what changes is, oh my God, where you might be in a situation where your ADHD flares up, or you go into a meeting, or you come to a podcast, for example, and you turn up on the wrong day, or you're a day late, or something goes on, and you would usually be like, oh my God, I'm so stupid. Like, what the hell's wrong with me? I'm such an idiot. People are just going to think, oh, she's so useless. Actually, it's just like, oh my God, Kim, like, get a grip of that ADHD. You're not managing your ADHD right. Instant change in how I'm talking to myself. It's not me at fault. It's how I'm managing my ADHD needs changing. And rather than stupid me, it's stupid ADHD, which is a very different way of thinking. And so actually now that is empowering, because now I can be like, okay, or it wasn't me, it was that I have a different brain. It's not that I have a fundamental flaw in my personality. It's not that I am stupid or weak or lazy. It's that actually I have these challenges, and it is not a level playing field. I thought it was. No one ever told me it wasn't. And now I know it isn't. I'm like, okay, now I can work around that. And when you understand ADHD and you can look at, okay, what are the things? Because there are things with every ADHD that neurotypical people will look at and go, oh my God, how do you do that? What? How do you do that? And you're like, what do you mean? That's easy. But to them, that's easy. They're like, no, that's not easy to be able to, stand on a stage and talk to people, or build successful businesses, or just to take these risks, or one of whatever it may be. So we have to understand, where are our strengths? Where are the things that we are good at? And that is when we can be empowered. When we are trying to, blame everyone else or everything else because we've got ADHD, and then not really finding our strengths, then it's going to be a problem. Because when people are playing to their strengths and they're in flow, their ADHD doesn't really show up that much. If you ask somebody what happens to your ADHD when you're doing something you love, like,
don't notice it.
Doesn't really, it's not really a problem. And I think, so going back to what you were saying about children, I think that actually it's not about over-diagnosing children or giving them a label. It's just about going, oh, okay, well, you've probably got ADHD, so that means you're probably this, not that. This will work for you. You might struggle with this, because actually, if you've got ADHD, here's the truth. There are some things that we will never be that great at, because executive functioning, the prefrontal cortex, we know with ADHD there's a 30% developmental delay, which means that's not our IQ, that is our ability to be mature, to organize ourselves, to do the things that we say we're going to do, good working memory, to be on time, to organize, as a child, remembering all your school books, remembering your homework, remembering this teacher needs this, and all of those things. That's always going to be a struggle for us. Now, there are strategies we can use.
Yeah.
If I know I've got ADHD, I can use those. If I don't know I've got ADHD, how do I know that I can use those? So I think that when we shy away from it and make it something like, I don't want to mention it, actually, that's when it becomes more of an issue. That, it could be this.
Yeah.
Okay, well, how do we work with it?
And even I think managing that with children, in that it doesn't matter if they do or they don't, if you suspect or see some signs, well, like I do this with mine, and I go, well, there's a chance that it could be that at play here. So actually, instead of responding to this behavior in this way, because I know that is probably not going to be effective, let's just consider this way. And if we're wrong, you get parents where one might think it is, one might think it isn't. Okay, well, let's just err on the side of caution here and go, well, maybe it is. So if we approach it like this, we're more likely to get a better result here. And like you say, it's awareness, isn't it?
And that's how we create the next generation of children that, neurodivergent, who it's not really a problem. Sometimes it's always going to be a problem, but actually they have self-esteem. And if you have self-esteem, the world is a very different place than if you have low self-esteem. And which comes full circle to square pegs. That's why I called the book that, because actually I would never identify myself as a square peg. The reason I did that was because I was the mother who, my poor daughter, who's ADHD, so ADHD and autism, I wanted her to fit in the world. And I didn't know what you now know, what I now know, what she knows. We didn't know that then. I was just like, what's wrong? And actually I was like, okay, to get on in the world, you have to fit in. You have to fit in, and I'm going to push you in all these places to try and make it okay for you. And of course, I was doing the complete opposite. So when I'm saying about those mothers where clients are going to me, oh my gosh, my mum, and I'm looking back, I'm just thinking, well, yeah, I was that mother. I was that mother. Square peg isn't about me being a square peg. It's about me being a mother trying to push my little square peg into a round hole.
Oh, I love that.
And if I'd have known that, everything would be different. So I think exactly what you're saying is right. It's not about, like, my kind of tagline I use is lose the label, wear the badge. Like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, because I know lots of very successful, you and I both, amazing ADHDers who have the dream lives. They've got the business, they've got the houses, they've got the relationships, they've got everything that other people are just looking at them that maybe are still doing a 9-to-5 job, that are like, oh, how'd you get all of that?
Well, the drive and the being less risk averse and all those sorts of assets that you can use. I think the awareness thing is huge, because I know, like, a prime example, my son told me recently about he felt picked on in class because the teacher had, not looking at him, looking completely past him to someone at the back of the room, and he was like over here, and she had said, take that pen out of your mouth, and I think he was fiddling with a pen in his mouth, and I'm like, you've just literally shamed him and called that out, and in a negative way, when it was doing no one any harm. He possibly wasn't even aware he was doing it. Like, I'll be on a call, I do all kinds of things and fiddle with my thing, like, and it's like, what, like, I think the more we have awareness, the more we can not do this, because those little things can chip and chip and chip away until you think
that's one negative connotation to go into the thing. And what we know is that child's probably helping them concentrate. We know that if you have ADHD, not if you don't have ADHD, they did some research. Kids with ADHD, when they fidget, they are able to focus more. Kids without ADHD, if they are fidgeting, or they can't focus well. But so having a pen, chewing a pen, having a fidget toy, as an adult, I never coach without having a pen in my hand. If I'm writing or not, I've got to have something to twiddle about.
Yeah, me too. Yeah.
That's our way of processing.
And now we have so much technology now, and we have devices everywhere. And I know that can be There's two
Yeah.
sides to that. But my husband will often say about the kids, like, oh, you're too screening. And like my daughter's a perfect example of she'll love, she's all into Christmas at the moment. She loves Christmas movies, but she loves to sit down and watch a movie, but she will never, ever, ever sit down and watch the movie. She has she'll go, I'm going to take up crocheting today. I'm going to make bracelets. There's something, or it'll even be, I'm watching this movie, but she plays a house design game on her phone. So she's like, I'm playing this while I'm watching that. And that's relaxing to her.
And now, I know now where if I look back at, I've never ever watched like a Harry Potter film or anything like that. And people go, and I'm like, my kids used to be like, oh, let's watch Harry Potter with my husband. And they'd all sit there watching it. And I'd sit there and I would feel like, because, back in these days, in the olden days, when you didn't have your screen in front of you, I'd be like, oh my God, I can't sit here all this time. How long is this film? An hour and a half. Okay. Right, okay. And it was hell for me. I couldn't do it. I'd have to have a book in front of me, or I'd be learning Spanish or something, because I couldn't sit and watch a film
without doing something.
It's just not, I can't do that.
I hear you. This is I feel like I have like 1,000 questions and could do this all day long, but I am conscious of the time. Our listeners, if they are ADHD, will be like, okay, I'm gonna do something else now. Yeah, I've been doing this nice walk while listening or whatever. So I am conscious of the time, but I think, there's a really great message there. And massively about like what I was saying about leaning into it rather than being aware of how to manage it. And I think that's huge, because you don't have to go, oh, well, that's it, I can't do this thing or that thing. But what coping strategies can you put in place? And like I said, for me, I need tidiness and order in order to not, because otherwise it becomes distraction, and it's like, it's a hindrance, whereas other people are quite happy being messy, but they'll have their other things that they find help them. Even with ADHD, we're still people, we have personalities, and they can be different. And I think, there's definitely an empowering message in there.
Find the things that work for you. And if you have got ADHD and you are struggling, I do think work with a coach, work with somebody who can help you find your strengths and your systems and strategies that work for you. And it might not be because your ADHD is not somebody else's. We're all very different. There's ADHD, and then there's all the life experiences and values and beliefs and stories that have got you to the place you are, that make you who you are. ADHD is just a fraction of you.
And
so working with somebody, but just saying actually what works for me and what doesn't work for me, because if something doesn't work for you, don't be afraid to go, do you know, I'm not doing that anymore. That does not work for me. I have done that in my business. Particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, I've really lent into my ADHD and gone, no, that doesn't work for me. I know it works for everyone else. Great. I see you all doing it. I see you all doing it really well. I've tried to do it. Every time I try to do it, doesn't work for me. I'm doing it my way. I'm doing it this way. And the difference it's made in my business, both sort of like from a revenue point of view, but also from a, in inverting commas, work-life balance, that elusive thing that everyone faces. But, actually, I am able to take time out of my business. My business runs very differently now to how it used to before I was aware of my ADHD and how to work for myself. And I think valuing as well, there's things that we need, and it's so boring and we don't like it, but we need sleep, we need time out, we need to walk away from our desks. I have a big thing that I drive through my clients is body before business. And whether that means that you get up in the morning and you do, a full-on workout or a run or whatever, or whether that means you just, spend 5 minutes having a coffee in the garden, or you spend 5 minutes cuddling your dog or whatever. You have to do something to serve you before we have to have fun. There's so many things that we can do. It was probably a whole nother podcast of strategies.
Oh no, that's a great that's such a great point though. I really,
it's serving yourself before your business, because otherwise you burn out and then you're useless. It's okay. It is okay to let go. Trust yourself. And I promise you will be so much more productive and powerful and successful for it.
And it's healthier for the neural pathways anyway, if you are enjoying everything, right?
I over the years, the amount of times I've said to clients, and this has always been a killer question, what do you do for fun? And I have had women just burst into floods of tears.
Nothing.
I don't know. I don't even know what would I do? What do I do for fun? Because it becomes all empowered. And that is when your ADHD will be off the chain. Go and have some fun. Go and then come back and you'll be like, oh, right, okay, all right.
Yeah,
it's not so bad.
That's so true. I'm guilty of that. No fun, and then oh, that's the secret ingredient I'm missing right now. Let's get that back. So what a great reminder. Kim, you are amazing. You have a fantastic book that I've mentioned I'm a big fan of, and we will be linking to that in the show notes as well. I know that you also train people to be ADHD coaches, which I think is phenomenal, because it's putting, like you say, an army of experts out there that can help others. And I think I wouldn't be one bit surprised if a lot of them are people who have been through that themselves and have ADHD themselves, because you always don't go through and go, I get this, I can help other people. And I think no matter how much you know, you can always benefit from the support of somebody else, because they can see what you can't see. So if it's okay, we'll link to that program as well in the show notes.
And I will give you a page as well for all our coaches that have certified for people if they are looking to work with someone around their ADHD. You know, we've got accountants, we've got therapists, we've got nutritionists, coaches, obviously all sorts of business strategists, so that you can work with people who really kind of get you and get your brain. So that's the plan. That's
fantastic. I just love every bit of what you're doing, and we're here to help shout that message out loud and proud. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and remember, go out there and shine your light bright, because you were born to be brilliant.